Partnership of Federal Highway Administration there. So today, we are very pleased to have one of our infrastructure uh, pioneers and working on the infrastructure policy for many years, Rick Gaddis from Cornell University, and Rick, I know Rick for many years there. So Rick has been very knowledgeable about the infrastructure policy. And so he's the Cornell program in infrastructure policy. This center actually has been, I think, well, the first one that are focusing on the infrastructure policy, especially when you're considering the infrastructure investment in the United States. That's $1 trillion every year here. And Rick's center is actually the first one and continue to be the best one focusing on the infrastructure policy. So today, it's a great pleasure that Rick is going to share his recent study regarding this market for transport study here. And this published paper also. And Rick, I know that you have so many titles, so many award that you can probably introduce there. So maybe I let you to really give a more a detailed introduction about your center, your background there. So Rick, the floor is yours.
Thanks, QC. I'm very grateful. Thanks for the warm, kind introduction, and thanks for the invitation to speak in the esteemed Build America Center's webinar series on modernizing infrastructure. And to QC's point, I am a professor at the relatively new Jeb Brooks School of Public Policy at Cornell, a professor of economics at Cornell. That's my background. More to the point today, I'm director of something called the Cornell Program in Infrastructure Policy that QC has helped us with for a long time. So I urge everybody to just check our website out. If you just Google CPIP Cornell, you'll see what we've been doing, and our advisory board, which I'm very grateful to for supporting our connections to industry in this. And I'm currently on sabbatical at the Hoover Institution at Stanford for the fall and spring semesters. So I've been developing this work while I'm on sabbatical at Stanford, and I'm happy to chat offline with anybody on this call about that. The work I want to present today is called Markets for Transport. It's a strong claim we're making that we can eliminate traffic congestion through scheduling, routing, and real-time pricing of the use of roads. So we're proposing here to price road use in real time, and I'll explain that in a second. But I want to give a shout out to my two friends and colleagues that I am working on this with, who are Peter Crampton, who was at the University of Maryland for many, many years in the economics department. I've lost track of how many years he was in Maryland's economics department, an expert on auctions and market design, and a German economist named Axel Okenfels, who is at the University of Cologne. And we have a series of papers that were published a few years ago that I'm very proud of with some co-authors. People may know Kara Kokelman at University of Texas at Austin, civil engineering. I'm also proud that one of these short papers got published in Nature. If people want to do a quick read of what we're talking about here, the Nature paper can give you a flavor for that, and the Journal of Institutional and Theoretical Economics, JITE, which is a very old journal, published the longer version. So I view this as an extension. I want to, as a result of the sabbatical, restart these efforts because I think this is a very important policy proposal. So I want to motivate this talk in a slightly different way. I want to just start off with some history, and hopefully this will help you understand why I believe this work is so important. So this year of 2025 is actually a pretty auspicious year because it will be 140 years since the creation, the invention of what is considered the first mass production automobile. That was done by a guy named Carl Benz. You might recognize that. The descendant, Mercedes-Benz, is descended from his work, was produced in Mannheim, Germany in 1885 as the Benz patent Motorwagen. And it's basically the first car put into series production. There's a picture of it there, two pictures of it. And the first internal combustion engine vehicle. And basically my point here is to take a look at that picture and think of what's happened over the past 140 years. Essentially, we've taken that design, which was Carl Benz design in 1885, and for the past 140 years, just made incremental modernizations and adaptations, improvements to that pretty simple design. So what have we done? If you take a look at that picture, we've added a fourth wheel to the motor wagon. We've added a passenger compartment. We've added more powerful engines. We've added safety features like a collapsible steering column and a padded dash and shatterproof glass. We've added better brakes. We've added a lot of bulk. We've added a lot of weight to protect the passenger and to provide comfort. But basically, everything that's happened over the past 140 years in this type of passenger surface transportation and trucks as well has been a modification or just a not a transformational change of Ben's original design, steered by the line of sight of the driver. So the way the thing is driven is the driver controlling a wheel, in this case, a handle, and steering the vehicle. So basically, we haven't had a lot of changes. There's been tremendous benefits, and I teach my students at Cornell they should study infrastructure because it'll give them an attitude of gratitude for the services that we have where we can travel relatively high speed, long distances that 100 years ago, people could not even conceive of. You do a day drive, for a few hours, and the way you're transported on the roads is amazing. But all of these are developments stemming from the Benz invention, just roadways to carry the automobile. And of course, that's, been extended enormously around the world. However, now we're in a situation where there's, I would say, growing costs of this technology for transportation. People may know on this called the INRIX Global Scorecard of Traffic Congestion that compares not all countries, but a few countries. I was interested to see that the US on average has about one working week lost in traffic congestion, which is the same as Germany, and that the UK is actually worse in the sense that there's 62 hours lost in the UK. And of course, we could go across the countries. That picture that I show here could be anywhere in the world, could be a developing country, could be a developed country, just traffic jams getting worse. Of course, we know there's a cottage industry that we're familiar with, presented at TRB in part on the negative effects of traffic congestion. PM 2.5 particulates from diesel fuels emissions have been found to be more harmful than we originally thought, but also gasoline harms the air, harms health. Higher obesity rates are associated with longer commutes, divorce rates. The other thing that's key is that in developing countries, as wealth increases, which is an economist will tell you a good thing, people urbanize, so they want to move off the country and into the city, densification, and they want to get a car. So those things put together give you these Bangkok and other places that have very high levels of congestion as those countries develop. And that could be anywhere around the world. And we recognize that those are growing. The second thing is just traffic accidents. And I could, go on, but taking a look at the National Safety Council's data, the sixth leading cause of deaths as of 2023. Number 3 was motor vehicle crashes with an astoundingly high number of 44,762 as recorded by the National Safety Council just in the US. And they're disproportionately young people. The death rate peaks at about 20.2 per 100,000 population for 21-year-olds. We know this has been a problem for a long time. And then again for 90 very old drivers, but a much smaller number at 23.2 per 100,000 population per year. This is the leading cause of preventable death for every age group from 5 to 22. There's still a lot of toddlers dying tragically in car accidents, considered the second leading preventable cause of death for every age group from 23 through 67. So this this is still a severe thing. I tried to put this in perspective because it's hard to for our brains to process numbers like that in terms of the magnitude of the damage that highway deaths are causing to the country. People may have visited the Vietnam, they may remember Vietnam or visited the War Memorial in Washington. It takes us about 16 months on U.S. highways to kill that number of people that are on the wall in Washington. And if people recall September 11th, as I do, then you have a sense that it was a tragic day with a large number of deaths. That's about 24 days of just U.S. highway deaths. So it's important to reduce traffic congestion, increase the safety of our roads. Hopefully, we have that. We all agree on that point. So the other thing I'll just toss out was I think this is like unusual COVID effects of people thought with everybody on lockdown, for example, during COVID, traffic accidents might go down, but that was not the case. There was an increase of people going out on the roads and driving recklessly, we think. Also, the effects of technology, like distractions and a distracted driver with cell phones and so forth has increased traffic accidents. I want to submit, however, that there's a lot of hope on the horizon. As I said, it's been 140 years since since Ben's invention in Mannheim, but things are changing very rapidly in the automotive world. First of all, I'm on sabbatical at Stanford, which is not far from San Francisco, and had the chance to take Waymos in San Francisco. I urge everybody on this call to do that if you have not, because it's an amazing experience to actually get in a vehicle that doesn't have a driver and see it go and be confident that it is able to navigate the streets of San Francisco. Now they're down in Palo Alto without any fear. There's also developments in locational technology, kinematics, which is the study of the movement of objects in space without reference to the forces that cause the movements. And those types of developments can help with the road pricing idea that we have here. I don't want to lean too much on the alternative fuels on this talk. So there's some people who get into a discussion about fossil fuels versus non. But I do believe that there's a lot of developments going on, including hydrogen, in the efficiency of alternative fuel vehicles that are going to probably make the emissions cleaner. The other thing I have to mention are developments in market design, which is Peter and Axel are doing a lot on. And we now have the ability to implement transparent and efficient pricing. And I'm talking about pricing of the use of roads in real time through a platform. I have to give Peter a shout out here. If you look at Forward Market Design, that's called Forward Market Design, is a new firm that Peter has set up that is a platform to help governments who want to use this approach. And they can customize the platform for the needs of their country or their network or their sector. And Peter claims in about 3 months. So the technology is available to do this. The location technology has improved enormously, and we think the time is right for pilot projects, at least, if not more, on this. So I think that let me just conclude by saying there's no sector in the US economy or even the global economy that I can think of that is more prepared for complete disruption than the surface transportation sector. So roads. So I wanted to launch a vision for the future of transportation. I don't think economists are often, it's the dismal science. So we're often criticizing policies and saying things are costly and times are bad and so forth. I don't think economists launch an optimistic, hopeful vision enough. So I wanted to think about a future where we have cabs connected in autonomous vehicles and burning new types of fuels, different types of fuels. And the engineers are pushing out as we speak on developing connected and autonomous vehicles. like the new CAVNU project that just came online in Michigan in July. Everybody's working hard on alternative fuels, hydrogen, electric, other ways of powering vehicles in a more clean, efficient way. But the area where it's not enough activity, I think, is in real-time pricing of roads. And the technology is ripe for this to happen. So you could imagine a roadway of the future where you had connected and autonomous vehicles burning alternative types of fuels, but they're guided by real-time road prices. And that roadway would work smoothly, it would work efficiently, and it would work safely. So you could also imagine if you didn't have real-time road pricing, you can have connected and autonomous vehicles stuck in traffic, just like the pictures that I showed before. So the area where I think we need the most effort right now is what I want to lay out here. So just some key insights from the vision. Technological progress is being made on both connected and autonomous vehicles and alternative fuels. But that progress is going to be inherently limited by traffic congestion unless we can get a policy solution. And it is a policy solution. It's not a technological problem at this point because of the location technologies that is embedded in your cell phone right now can allow this to work. Research progress needs to be made on real-time and network-wide pricing of roads to get us to free flow and a safe and reliable service. So a couple steps back, I guess, to think about the nature of traffic congestion. It's kind of a famous quote from Herbert Moring, who was a very well-known person in transportation economics. And we all kind of know this, but it's useful to restate. The users of road and other transportation networks not only experience congestion, they create it. In deciding how and when to travel, most travelers take into account the congestion they personally expect to experience, but few consider the cost their trips impose on others by adding to congestion. So that's a negative congestion externality. When you get on the road, you congest that road for others, and you don't really think about, most people don't really think about that when they decide to take a trip. So this is a classic problem in economics. It's like air pollution, it's like water pollution, it's like noise pollution from an airport, where if you live near Heathrow, you might hear takeoffs and landings. And that is a negative externality that has been studied in economics for over a century now. And the key thing about traffic congestion externality that we may know of is it's highly nonlinear. So, and I'll show you a picture, but we kind of all know this, which is you can watch traffic congestion around the Bay Area, for example, or many other cities, particularly the morning peak, where people get on the roadways and they get on the entry ramps. And if just a small percentage increase in the number of cars occurs, the amount of traffic congestion, the congestion level goes way up. And of course, in New York City, that's where the term gridlock came from, where basically the throughput or the efficiency of the system collapses. So this is the Federal Highway Administration, just basic graph. The number of vehicles that get through per hour can drop by as much as 50% when congestion sets in. At high traffic levels, the freeway is kept in this condition of collapse for several hours. So, I tell the students, obviously, it's working to the right. As traffic increases, you get collapse, but it also works in reverse. So if you can shave 5, 6, 7% off the peak, either in the morning or the afternoon, you can get to a condition. You don't have to have a huge number of vehicles off the road, but if you can just shave a small number, you can get to relatively closer to free flow conditions pretty easily. So that's where prices come in. At this point, we need to talk about Nobel Prize winner in economics, who is famous in this area, who is at Columbia, William Vickrey. And I did a little background reading. Maybe this is one of his earliest papers, but there's a famous paper in the May issue of American Economic Review. And note the date. This is 1963, okay? And Vickrey begins this paper by saying, I will begin with a proposition that in no other major area are pricing practices so irrational, so out of date and so conducive to waste as in urban transportation. Two aspects are particularly deficient: the absence of peak off differentials and the gross underpricing of some modes relative to others. You could write that same quote many decades later about surface transportation today, and you would still be on point. So there's no peak off peak, there's no pricing of roads. Underpricing of roads relative to urban transit causes massive dislocations in the use of roads versus other forms of transportation, particularly at peak times. And so it hasn't changed in decades. So Vickery is clearly a major player here. And Vickery advocated for congestion pricing. He's sort of the grandfather of congestion pricing. There's a huge host of benefits. Obviously, it addresses the congestion externality. There's environmental harms associated with traffic congestion. If the roads are priced accurately, it encourages drivers to explore travel alternatives during those peak times. It boils down consumer decision making to one number. Basically, the price of the road at the time I'm going to use the road drives whether I should wait. Should I wait and travel later? Should I get up early and travel earlier? How should I behave? I'll show you how that works in a minute. And it improves safety. I think we know one interesting result from the New York City congestion pricing program already is that injuries and deaths of pedestrians went way down as traffic congestion within the cordon fell, because traffic congestion is risky. Traffic congestion is harmful, particularly for pedestrians, but also for other drivers. So it allows you to consider joint optimization, meaning other alternatives. I think on the supply side, it's even it's not as much of a focus as the demand side, but I think it is a critical thing to keep in mind that road pricing, real-time network-wide road pricing, can solve a centuries-old problem, which is the politicization of infrastructure spending, which Adam Smith wrote about in The Wealth of Nations in 1776, about how in some cases roads are put in front of the homes of a lord, for example, as opposed to where the commerce requires them to be put. Probably goes back even before the time of Adam Smith. But here on the supply side, if you see just where road prices are highest in the peak, that's where you should put your next dollars of infrastructure investment. And so that should be an objective economic guide as opposed to political guide for how you use your dollars of transportation spending. Obviously, it's going to solve a distortion at the same time that it raises funding, raises additional funds for infrastructure, and it allows for innovation. So I think we would see more innovation in the road space if road use was accurately priced. Now, let me give a little bit of economics background. I don't know everybody's background here, but this work stems from Ronald Coase, who is one of my heroes, who's also was a Nobel Prize winner in economics, and he focused a lot of his work on using markets to solve externality problems. And I boil this down, it's highly simplified, to 3 steps. First, Coase realized that a lot of either commons, probably heard of the tragedy of the commons, or externality problems are really property rights problems. They're really a problem where the property rights to the use of some resource are either not defined or are poorly defined. So your first step should be to define excludable use rights. You're not privatizing the resource. You're just saying we're going to give you a right to use it, which is old in Roman law called ius utendi. Like you have the use of an apartment when you rent it from a landlord, but you make those rights tradable. So you create a market in those rights, and then you try to get that market to operate as efficiently as you can. You try to reduce transaction costs in that market because you want accurate prices. So that's something economists like. And I'll say there's now a lot of examples. There's a lot of cases in very different resources where this Coasean approach has been utilized. And so, and the differing degrees of success. But a couple of examples include tradable permits for sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide, which is associated with burning coal. Back when the United States burned a lot of coal to make power, and it was dirty coal, that we created a cap and trade market for sulfur dioxide. We can talk more about that later. One of my favorites, though, is, of course, people know about the commons problem in fishing, particularly off Massachusetts coast for cod, but in other places around the world, fish are a common resource. And so there's the tragedy of the commons. There's the tendency to overfish to the point where the species cannot reproduce and you deplete the resource. So the Kosian solution would be to create ITQs, or individual transferable quotas, which is basically just a limit on the amount of harvest you can have, and then you could make those tradable. Another one that I like is a multi-billion-dollar market in radio spectrums. The use of the radio spectrum that your cell phone uses to communicate with cell towers. The problem, of course, is interference with the signal. And so Coase wrote one of his earliest articles on the Federal Communications Commission. And instead of having what they call beauty contests to assign the use of the radio spectrum to those with the best proposal, they would have auctions for the use of the radio spectrum. Back in, I guess it was 2008, there was a movement at USDOT to create a market in aircraft takeoff and landing slots to address traffic congestion at airports. That would be a Kosian application. And interesting work I was not aware of until I researched for this talk was auction mechanisms for immigration slots. So the point is, there's a lot of literature in economics and policy on the use of a Kosian approach to address these negative externalities that could be relied on as we think about addressing this big kahuna, if you will, of traffic congestion in roads. So let's talk about another element, a key element of this from a different industry. And this is electric power. So a key element of our idea would be the independent system operator who would manage the road market. We would borrow from the learning in electric power, and an independent system operator in energy is this independent organization, as it says in its title, and it has an exclusive, simple job. It's not simple in practice, but in theory it is, which is managing the electric grid, the supply and demand of power on the market, on the grid is managed by a market in wholesale power. And the ISO is set up just to ensure the safety and reliability of the electric system. And just to give people a flavor for how ISOs and energy look, here's, you can look to see where you are today. I'm out in California. CAISO is the ISO that is managing the grid out here in California. I think this gives you a flavor for how big these grids are, these ISOs are, and how they're managing power in real time on the electric grid. I think that's interesting. Just to be clear, this is wholesale power, not retail. So in the wholesale power market, they are using prices that I think change every 5 to 10 minutes or so. And they're equating supply and demand for the grid, where if I understand the engineering correctly, the supply of power coming onto the grid has to match almost exactly the demand for power, the load coming off, or it damages the grid. So the ISO has to be very careful about balancing that, and they use wholesale markets to do that. So we would take this concept of an ISO in power and apply it to road markets. So let me be clear, if I have some water, I'll be clear about how this would work, how we would set up a market for road use. First, we would create something we call slots. We're calling a slot. And what is a slot? A slot is the right to use a particular section of road at a particular time interval. So it might be a particular lane section. It could be a mile or less than a mile for, say, a 5-minute interval from 9:05 a.m. to 9:10 a.m. on a certain date. That is a use right That is your ius utendi, and that is the thing of value. The second step is to make the slots tradable in what we could call a slot market. As soon as you have a trade, it's important to recognize this. As soon as there's a trade in the slot market, you have a price. And so the price is, an economist will tell you, prices are key. So the prices are what allocate supply and demand. So they allocate people's use of the road, but they also allocate investment on the supply side. And so let me be clear that we are proposing to price all road usage network in real time. So that basically the entire network, just like electricity, all electricity is priced. We would price all road usage network in real time this way, and that would generate these prices. A key thing about, and I don't know, the most important, but is to recognize that there would be both spot and forward markets in road use. So forward markets are trading ahead. So it's a private contract to lock in a particular price in the future of that road slot. And if you're a big user, say you're UPS or DHL or Amazon or somebody like that, you're the US Postal Service, you're using the roads a lot, you might want to lock in a future price of a particular road slot in order to hedge your risk. So as soon as you do that, you allow the trading in these forward markets. That creates a price, a market for the future use of the road, and that tells users the direction of change in the price. So it's not just what's the price today that's going to be my commute to work. You're also thinking about how's that price changing? What does the market think the future price of road use is going to be? So this is applying what I would say are Coasian principles to the use of roads. These would be the key policies, to set this up. And I'll say this might seem for people who, never thought about it before, that this is a really radical, wild idea, pricing all road use in real time and creating a network, a price network. But I want to submit that it's maybe not as radical as people might think. First, many people on this call are probably familiar with Origo and the efforts of Tim Whitty and the team at the University of at Oregon DOT, who for years did pilot programs, surveys, and everything else to shift from a funding their road network, the state of Oregon's, from a per gallon tax on gas and diesel fuel to a per mile driven charge, a RUC or a road use charge. This program this year, July, will be 10 years, where they've had Origo, which is a road use charge. Some people prefer to call it an MBUF, a mileage-based user fee, but you can use either one you want. But I'm pretty sure that the Origo program was the first network-wide RUC program in the world. The key thing, though, is that this is strictly a revenue raiser. It's instead of the state's gas tax. It's not in addition to. So the idea was to divorce the charge for the use of the roads from the use of the fuel that the vehicle has. Because obviously, if for environmental and other reasons you're trying to discourage the use of fossil fuels, if you then say, oh, we're going to fund our road network by taxing the use of fossil fuels, you have a problem. The analogy that I've heard is suppose someone were to say, we're going to fund our healthcare system with taxes on cigarettes, but on the other hand, we want to discourage smoking of cigarettes because it's bad for your health. Well, at some point, if you succeed in discouraging the smoking of cigarettes, then you're going to have your revenue decline. And so we've got this problem, and other people know that the state and federal gas taxes are generally not indexed to inflation. So the purchasing power of that revenue declines over time. But the key thing for Argo is that the prices are flat. There's no dynamic pricing. There's no congestion pricing. It's just a revenue raiser. As of December 23, though, I believe there's about 60 price managed lane corridors in the US. People are familiar with the dynamic pricing of lanes that goes up during peak times. So we have that on certain lanes. What Crampton, Geddes, and Oakenfels are proposing is the marriage of these two concepts, where you take the managed price lane idea of dynamic pricing and combine it with the Origo program to get a fully priced road network like this. So my point is that this is not a radical extension from existing policies regarding road use in the US. So let's talk about if you took the ISO idea in power and you superimpose it on transport, what would that look like? We would create regional independent system operators that would create spot and forward markets and road slots. Now, let me be clear. We all know that the providers, the owners of roads, at least in the United States, is a highly, I guess, balkanized network where you have county roads, you have city streets, you have state, interstate highways, you have everything else. The ISO would be sitting above that and would have to coordinate with the owners of the roads, which maybe makes this a little bit more difficult to implement in the US. And it might be easier to at least start in places where the ownership of the road network is not as balkanized. And we could talk about certain other countries where maybe this would be appropriate as a pilot project. So the ISO would be working with the road operators in that way and managing their networks. So the ISO creates prices that ensure max flow through the system. So if you hold a funnel under the water, under the spigot, for example, and you get the handle exactly right, the water will flow through the funnel as fast as possible. If you turn it up too much, the funnel backs up. Too little, you don't get as much. Think of the prices as the handle. And so the ISO is manipulating prices to get the water to flow through the funnel exactly as you want it. So I have a bullet here on the ISOs coordinating with public road users in order to manage the system properly. A couple key things. They're pretty simple market principles. The ISO, and this is true for power, the ISO has to ensure open access. So transport capacity cannot be withheld. There's no monopolization of the transportation network. It's open to all on non-discriminatory terms. So the ISO charges the same price, for the same vehicle to anybody, and its operations are highly transparent. You can go on the web right now for New York's ISO and see what the prices are. They have it on their website. They're changing in real time. We envision the road ISO to be something very similar to that. So it has a pretty simple mandate. It has a governance structure, a board that oversees the ISO. I won't go into the governance structure right now, but it's in my papers with Axel and Peter, if others want to see that. And of course, you can read up because we're transposing the energy ISO onto the road network. So what would this look like? Well, a very simple market model, you would have the open access network operated by the independent system operator, and you would have the vehicles and the users. The problem with this is high transaction costs. So if you're a road user, it would be complicated for you to work with an independent system operator to figure out how you should drive and so forth. So what we envision is that service providers will enter the market, SPs, and service providers would offer you plans. They would do the hard work of trading in the forward markets to mitigate, to hedge risk, and to tell you the direction of change in prices as with other commodities. And they would compete in these road use markets. The service providers that would become entrepreneurial companies that would come in to provide these road services would develop user apps that allow basically expression of demand. So when do the drivers want to travel? How far do they want to travel, et cetera. So we think the market would sort of look like this, where you'd have independent system operators in between the drivers, the users of the vehicles, and the ISO. And the different SPs would be competing for road use, and they would provide a lot of these services. So that the service providers would provide a lot of value here for road users, and they would be sort of feeding the prices into a system like this. So this is, again, Peter's vision for what your screen might look like. And part of the reason I'm putting this up is you know, in talking to Peter and Axel, excuse me, quite a bit, that it doesn't require a massive change from existing technology on the user side. It requires policy changes, but it doesn't require massive change on the user side to shift from current practices to what we're talking about. So here, if you look at this screen, this is, again, Peter thinking about his commute to the University of Maryland. I guess he was living in Tyson's Corner. And you'll notice it's a 1 month it's a 1 month package here. And he's you know, talking about the cost per trip. The key thing, though, is you know, how long would it take him to arrive at work? The key thing is the box on the lower right, where with both spot and forward markets, instead of saying, gee, I have an important meeting and I know there's traffic congestion, I should leave 2 hours early so I'm not late for the meeting, you would actually have prices. And you could say, well, look, if I leave 10 minutes later, I'm going to pay more. But if I wait 20 minutes, I'm going to pay less, right? And so similarly for the, if you leave earlier, right? If you leave 10 minutes early, you pay more, 30 cents more. But if you leave 20 minutes earlier, you're going to pay 30 cents less, and so forth per trip. So that's the role. The box in the lower right is the role of forward markets in road use. And so this is really critical because, as we all know, for congested systems, there's so much uncertainty. You really don't know. You can predict from your experience how long it might take if there's a problem or a bottleneck, something like that. But you really don't have any objective measure of that. So what the spot and forward markets do is to reduce the uncertainty associated with your travel. And let me show that more clearly with Google Maps that a lot of people are probably familiar with. So again, this would be Peter's at the University of Maryland, but suppose he has to get to a morning meeting at Tyson's Corner, and he would go to Google Maps, and it would show him this, that we're all from Baltimore, so I'm familiar with the Washington Beltway, that we might see, right? So you would see bottlenecks around the Washington Beltway. The traffic is being congested because road use is not being priced in real time. So you might say, you know, typically 40 minutes, hour 15. Suppose now you have the independent, you're doing the same trip. So you're doing the same trip, but you have the independent system operator managing traffic in real time. And keep in mind what that ISO is doing. It's clearing the market. So where supply and demand equate for road use in real time to get to maximum flow conditions in an ongoing basis. What would this same trip look like? It would look like this. Okay, so notice a couple differences. First of all, your vehicle is identified, so they know it's you. I'm happy to discuss privacy, but I think that's been a moot issue in transportation for a long time. Anytime you use Google Maps or Waze, you're revealing your location. You're revealing your location when you use your credit card. So I think technology has obviated the privacy concerns long ago. But here you're saying, okay, this is my vehicle, and here's the current road price, right? Notice the red number. The current road price is probably too low, but the price of that drive is 3 hours and 42 minutes. But the key thing is the arrow, right? That's the forward market. So the forward market is telling you that prices are going up. So you should get on your horse, as the saying goes, get in the car and leave. So you shouldn't wait because prices are going to go up for this trip. If prices were going to go down, then you should maybe wait a little bit. The key thing is that this drive, which had a lot of red and yellow in it, is now all blue, right? So you're paying basically, because you're paying explicitly for that road use, you are buying the certainty of travel, right? That's the key thing here. And you can put in your value of time if you want to take it really fast and so forth. The key thing I'm trying to convey here is that this is not a drastic change. I think a lot of older listeners to this talk underestimate the amount of occasions when young people in urban environments use a mapping program like Google. And so if you just fed real-time road prices into the system, you could get to this this outcome that we have here. So here's a side-by-side just to compare the two commutes. Transport is mostly free, but it comes, quote unquote, free is in quotes. Nothing's free, right? But it comes at the very high cost of uncertain congestion and delays, which we all know are frustrating, angering, causes more traffic accidents, and so forth. If we create this market, it puts a price on road use, but it reduces, or if the ISO gets it right, eliminates delays if they can change the prices quickly enough in real time. So you're shaving that peak. Remember the nonlinearity. You're shaving that peak. So if you can have some drivers who leave early, or they take transit, or they stay home for another hour and do email, or they change the road that they use, whatever it is, so that you decongest those main thoroughfares, you get to the happy situation, which is at the bottom, where you pay explicitly for road use in real time, but you get the benefit of no congestion. Now, some people, an immediate concern that I hear about this talk, I don't hear so much about privacy concerns anymore, although I'm happy to discuss that if people want. The real concern about implementing road prices that are dynamic is equity. So they're worried that this would be in economic terms, regressive. So if you could push a big button on the wall and abstract away from political concerns, and you could say, you know, we're going to implement this right away, wouldn't that disproportionately hurt the poor? So it would be regressive in the sense that this would hit the poor. And that's maybe intuitively correct. But there's a number of reasons why we should think carefully about that. First of all, both the poor and the rich will benefit from maximum flow traffic conditions. So I believe that the Vickery's quote, "The road system is so inefficient at this point that it would make everybody better off." There's no income groups that would be worse off by alleviating congestion. The poor are hurt by congestion. Indeed, traffic congestion is likely to be regressive. In New York, we're familiar with urban buses that are stuck in traffic congestion. Public transit, bus transportation in particular, is hurt by congestion that's used disproportionately by lower income groups. And that is alleviated. So with free flow conditions, the buses will be moving more predictably, and they would be moving more smoothly through the urban environment. So all users benefit from improving the certainty of travel time. I don't believe that. And in fact, we have surveys that show lower income groups in particular value certainty. So people who are on shifts and so forth really need to know, really benefit if we increase the certainty of travel time. They can switch to less expensive travel times if prices are revealed. Also, there's a key thing that is sometimes hard to think about, but in this system that I'm proposing, roads have different values, right? So I don't know, DC, the Washington DC Beltway might be more valuable, meaning the price that people are willing to pay to use the road, than say a rural street in Southern Maryland. So people sort of think, well, the poor have longer commutes than the wealthy do, therefore they're going to be hurt by this. But it becomes more complicated when you have different values of roads, because the rich are likely to travel on higher valued roads than the poor. So even if a poor driver travels farther, they might have a lower road bill, because it's a lower value road. So you have to estimate that for the entire network, which would be challenging. Also, I want to stress there's the concept of horizontal equity. Most people think of vertical equity like redistribution. Does this proposal redistribute in a regressive way, meaning hurting the poor more than the rich? But there's another concept of equity, which is very useful, which is called horizontal equity, which is sort of fairness in your pay for what you use, right? Which is very intuitive for a lot of people. So richer people traveling whatever it is on DC Beltway would pay for that value. Poorer people would not. I'll just end the equity considerations with saying some recent research that a lot of people are familiar with on dynamic tolling projects. And we don't have an example yet, although we have some ideas for working with private companies in some countries and areas that might be interested in trying this. But we don't have an example where we could study the redistributive effects of network-wide dynamic pricing, right? So we have to use other examples. But we do have dynamic tolling projects in the US that sit alongside general purpose lanes that many people on the call are probably familiar with. And I was fascinated to read a paper that was presented at the American Economic Association meetings in San Francisco in January by Cook and Lee that studied the distributional effects of dynamically priced highway toll lanes. So I'll just read it. Relative to a world in which the same number of highway lanes are all free, unpriced status quo tolling, meaning dynamic tolling, increases aggregate welfare and benefits drivers in all income quartiles, driven in part by the option value. So that's saying that the lower income groups value the option, right, of having dynamic lanes that provide more certainty in travel. Moreover, we find that drivers in the bottom income quartile gain the most under status quo tolling. These heterogeneous welfare effects by income stem primarily from the spatial distribution of lower and higher income drivers. So the lower income drivers, because they coming from farther in some cases, benefit disproportionately from this. So QC, I'm happy to go through some more slides, but I only have a few minutes left. Should I take questions or continue?
Go ahead, please. I mean, I think that this is all great information. So maybe you want to finish, and
Okay.
we can take a few questions once you finish.
Okay, sure. So people who aren't living and breathing this addresses there's a key point in surface transportation that many people are aware of, where there's an intuitive idea that if you're facing a congested road, you're seeing all these lanes, you should build another lane, right? The problem is we should expand capacity. But that's talking about unpriced capacity. You're adding more free lanes. And there's kind of a famous paper by two guys I know well, Duranton and Turner, in the American Economic Review in 2011 called The Fundamental Law of Road Congestion. And basically, it shows that that's ineffective. We cannot build our way out of traffic congestion. If unpriced congestion, and they actually estimate how long it takes there's something called induced demand. So the addition of the added lane causes more development in that corridor, whatever the forces are, that adds to the demand for that road. And pretty soon the road becomes just as congested as it was before. Moreover, in some places in the cities, it's just impossible to add lanes. So first of all, it's not going to reduce congestion in the long term. Second of all, it's extremely costly to add lanes in an urban environment in some cases. So you almost have to go for what we're talking about in terms of a real-time network riding road pricing. Also note that Uber and Lyft have come around to understanding this. There was discussion when ride-sharing services first came online that they were going to reduce congestion. We found that is not the case in unpriced networks because the drivers are often just cruising around waiting for a fare, and they might actually add to congestion. So you need to go to this model. I'll just give a couple of examples. What's happened in New York City recently been in the news is a tremendously important example. But note Stockholm, Malmo, Trondheim, London, Hong Kong, around the world, cordon pricing has been used. People call it congestion pricing. But I think what we're proposing of a network wide is the real McCoy. There's a cordon, there's a circle, and if you go inside the circle during peak times, you pay an added fee, and that's Manhattan. Here's Stockholm was one of the Swedes were leaders. They did a lot of surveys first. And here's a £2 charge. It was a while ago, 2006. And you can see the reduction in traffic congestion associated with it. And the survey showed that after it was implemented, once the Swedes saw the effects of congestion pricing on Stockholm, they really supported the idea. And same for Londoners. And then they began tweaking the program a little bit. Here's the London example. Since 2013, boy, the time passes quickly. Central London congestion charging zone. The city of London is actually pretty small. It sprawls, of course, for miles and miles, but the actual city of London pretty small. So this, if you're familiar with London, is this area that was very congested. And basically continuing to deliver congestion relief is broadly in line with a 30% reduction achieved in the first year. So traffic flowing in London is flowing much more smoothly. We are thinking about taking that concept to its logical conclusion, pricing the entire network in real time. So QC, I'll stop there with just a few minutes left if people have questions.
Well, thank you, Rick. And is there any question from the audience? Maybe you can probably unmute yourself and ask the question there.
I must have been very thorough. I answered everything.
No, so actually, Rick, I have a couple questions actually. So
okay,
it's a great idea though. You talk about this, the concept, the ISO is there. So people were talking about treating the transportation service as a utility there. So you actually have that idea, or I would probably say more like a framework that you can implement that the transportation service as like a utility service there.
right.
So borrowing the idea from the electrical market there. So how do you expect those kind of a big transaction cost, considering the electrical market here right now in the transportation field that we rely on the public agency, state Department of Transportation or the local Department of Transportation to really managing the operations of the stuff. Then switch into this ISO model here you have. And do you expect like the transaction cost will be higher compared to right now the model that we're running?
So what transaction cost is a really broad concept. QC, do you mean the transactions? Like
Yeah,
so
I'm considering everything there. So because I'm considering probably also like the fee collection there. So you talk about the tolling, that the fee collections. You talk about basically also the state DOT are operating the right now the free road that you have to really operate all kinds of maintenance and operating related expenditures there. So you think that if we switch to this utility fee model, and I see like the big difference basically because people understand the toll operation there. Your framework, your paper, your idea is much broader. It's almost all the transportation service there, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So then I actually don't know how this would be affecting the current the model here. So I know that this is probably is only right now that is a great idea here. So have you seen
Mm.
anything related to that, like in terms of the implementation? What are the
Yes, yeah.
yeah, what are
It-
the barriers or what are the challenges
mm.
you think that we need to address?
Well, yeah. I mean, if it's sort of logistically as opposed to sort of psychologically, to people, I think people would have accounts. You would have a sort of a monthly account. Um, we could get into, Kara Kokelman has proposed some ways that this could be done. But the idea would be you'd have a month, sort of a monthly transportation account, a bill, kind of like you would have a utility bill, and you would have a plan, and you would have a road use plan, and I guess the independent system operator would be the entity that would be collecting the revenues from your road use account. So we to tell you the truth, QC, I think we're at the stage of still uh, working with the concept, but the actual notion how we would implement it, in the real world of working with the state DOT, is kind of another question. So it would be very interesting to think that through. But our idea is that there would be a monthly transportation accounts that people would have. I will say one thing about that. Again, co-author Kara Kokelman has developed this idea of credit-based congestion pricing, where basically you would be credited. Each driver would get sort of credits for the mean amount of usage. So the average driver would pay nothing. So we haven't talked about how the initial allocation of the rights would take place, but that's the idea. I'll just maybe refer the listeners to Kara's work on the credit-based congestion pricing and how that these accounts would work. So beyond that, I'd have to think it through more, but I understand what you're saying about implementation.
Yeah, this is a great idea. I mean, I have never thought about it in this way. So we got yeah, it's a very,
It's a big idea.
it's a big idea. It's a very
Right,
open-minded concept. If this can be implemented, uh, definitely make a significant impact there. So I want to also go beyond what you discussed here. So you mentioned this. This is all based on the caution principle that.
right,
So you also listed that the three steps for using this to solve the using the market approach to really address the externalities there. So,
right.
and would that be possible? So we're talking about right now is more like you talk about also the sustainability, the green stuff that you put a
Right.
value here. So can we apply the same principle and also step to address like social inequality issues there. So I mean the question here is that let's say we talk about any kind of social issues there, even talking about
Mhm.
some of the infrastructure project that cause disparities in within some communities there. So if I mean probably it will be a challenge there, but I like what you present here. A lot of
Mhm.
information I learned. I try to
Mhm.
really digest it quickly and see how they can be applied to my research here. So
Yeah.
how do we really apply this to um, the social inequality issues there? Can we price and use the market approach to address this kind of social inequality issues?
Yeah. Well, so if you go back to these accounts, I mean, I would go back to utility models where
Okay.
people for water bills have certain subsidies. So you would get a certain, if your income is below a certain level, you would get a certain amount of free credits. Because the idea is transportation, we think is a crucial service. So we wouldn't want anybody to be not have access to that network. I think we do the same thing with power, where we don't want any households to go without power. So you might get credits based on low income status. And you could do the same thing with the accounts that we're talking about for transportation. So you're basically ensuring that everybody has access. So the idea is that if we move to the system, and of course we price water, We price power in real time. We price a lot of things, but we want to make sure that nobody's left out of the network. So the
Mm-hmm.
way we do that is by giving a subsidy of some sort. There's rural air subsidies for small towns don't lack access to air transportation, for example. And I would borrow some of those same models from these other sectors, but apply it to road transportation, where you're giving a certain amount of subsidy into somebody's account based on their, based on being in a low income quartile, something like that. So rather than trying to redistribute QC, so one thing I constantly harp on is let prices work, let prices do their job. Don't use prices to redistribute, but be sure that everybody has access to the service. And the way we do that across sectors is to give a certain amount of subsidy, whether you call it a credit or something else, into their account to ensure they have basic service. And that's universal service, right? That's that idea.
Well, thank you very much. And last call from for audience. If you have a question for Rick here. Oh, okay. So,
No,
Rick,
I guess
so
I answered.
thank you. Yeah,
Sure.
thank you very much for your very insightful presentation. It definitely